Number 10. Monstrous-looking mystery fish. A cryptic-looking blogspot post dating back to 2011 describes one Caribbean family's alleged discovery of a monstrous-looking fish along the Playa de Cienaguita de Limon in Costa Rica. 6 men had gone out fishing one day with plans to bring fish back home to their families for dinner. They took to the water with a trammel, which is actually illegal, and spent several hours moving along catching whatever crossed its path. One man, who spoke anonymously with a local news outlet, described taking the trammel out of the water and spotting the strange creature, which was moving around with part of his body opening. Since he'd never seen something like it before, the men took a closer look and quickly decided that they had no desire to eat the thing because it was so downright bizarre looking. Instead of releasing it back into the ocean, the group took the fish home to show their friends and relatives, who reportedly couldn't stop looking at the strange specimen. They took photos, although none seem to be available online today, with some spectators even suggesting that the creature had connections to extraterrestrials and UFOs. The discoverers supposedly dug a hole and buried the fish, although this entire story is questionable from the get-go. For one, the news source the blog is linked to no longer works, and other articles about the ordeal are virtually non-existent, leaving us to wonder whether the demonic-looking specimen was even real, and if so, the circumstances revolving around its discovery. Number 9. Pig-snouted brittle star. A newly described brittle star is making headlines for its bizarre appearance. It has arms that look like they're made of thousands of pig snouts. With the body measuring just 3 centimeters in diameter and 8 centimeter arms, it's very small. Unlike most brittle stars, which have 5 or 6 arms, this brittle star has 8, and its underside is equipped with long jaws and a collection of thorny teeth. These creatures lurk in the South Pacific, near the French-owned territory of New Caledonia, at depths between 360 and 560 meters, in an environment that scientists believe has remained largely unchanged for millions of years. It's been dubbed a living fossil and an evolutionary relic, as the pig-snouted brittle star hasn't really changed since the days of the dinosaurs. Researcher Tim O'Hara, who participated in a recent study on the creature, told Live Science that tropical marine habitats are good places for finding living fossils. He discovered the pig-snouted brittle star in 2015, 4 years after it was placed in a collection of unidentified specimens at the French National Museum of Natural History in Paris. A DNA test revealed that the species is not closely related to other echinoderms, including other brittle stars. Scientists consider it to be part of a new family, which they've named Ophiogiridae. Paleontologist and study co-author Ben Tai remembered seeing a 180 million-year-old fossil with a similar pattern, leading experts to conclude that the new species is very ancient. O'Hara and his colleagues hope to discover more living fossils in the New Caledonia region. Number 8. Teeny tiny frog. During an expedition to Borneo's Kuba National Park in 2004, scientists discovered an extremely tiny orange and red frog species that grows to just 1 centimeter long while searching for lost amphibians. They named the pea-sized creature Microhyla nepenthicola after the small pitcher plant they found it living in, and it's the Old World's smallest known frog species. The frog lays its eggs within the plant, and its tadpoles live in what the BBC describes as an organic goo until they reach maturity. In addition to being distinctively small, the species has other traits that are unlike most frogs. Its tiny size and the so-called reduced webbing between its toes are believed to be evolutionary traits that help the frog navigate within the slippery pitcher plant it lives in. The only frog in the world smaller is called Eleutherodactylus iberia, and it is smaller than a dime and found in a handful of places in southern Cuba's Holguin province. Like many other creatures, it's under threat of extinction due to deforestation and could disappear before scientists get a chance to study it in depth. Number 7. Alligator fish hybrid. Earlier this year, a British expat in Singapore discovered the remains of a so-called prehistoric creature with an alligator's head and the body of a fish. It was found on the banks of the McRitchie Reservoir. The large animal seemed like a crocodile at first to Karen Lithgow. Upon taking a closer look, she realised it was what appeared to be a combination of 2 animals that cannot realistically even mate. Local officials identified the creature as an alligator gar, a fish species endemic to the southern United States. Described as a living fossil, it remains largely unchanged from the ancestors it evolved from. Authorities believe the dead fish ended up 16,000 kilometres from its native habitat through the pet trade, Young alligator gar specimens measuring just 20 centimetres long on average are available from local fish markets according to local media outlets. But they get much bigger, often reaching up to 2.4 metres long and weighing more than 130 kilos. When this one grew too large for someone to realistically take care of, or they decided they didn't want it for some other reason, its owner likely released it into local waters with no apparent concern for how it could affect the fragile ecosystem. In addition to being massive, alligator gars are unmanageable as pets because they can live for decades. They mature extremely slowly and typically can't reproduce until they're at least 10 years old. As this unfortunate ordeal shows, it's usually best to leave wildlife where it belongs, in the wild. Would you ever consider having an alligator gar as a pet? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. Strange extinct lizard. A scientific paper published in early 2020 claimed that a tiny hummingbird-sized creature named the Oculus dentavis coungray, found inside a 99-million-year-old piece of amber, was the world's smallest dinosaur. The study was retracted later in the year, and new research suggests that the strange animal is a prehistoric lizard. The study's co-author, Juan Diego Daza, described it as unlike any lizard we have today. Scientists examined 2 specimens that were discovered in Myanmar and found that the lizards had scales, pointy dinosaur-like teeth attached directly to the jawbone rather than in sockets, and bulging lizard-like eye structures and shoulder bones, according to CNN. They were found to represent 2 different prehistoric lizard species, Oculus dentavis naga and Oculus dentavis coungray. Some of the confusion experts encountered stemmed from the creature's strange skulls, which they now believe were distorted by the amber that preserved them. The animals are also pretty strange looking compared to modern-day lizards, which further led researchers astray. These newly identified species lived between 145.5 and 66 million years ago during the Cretaceous period, when many modern-day lizard and snake groups evolved into existence. But they lack the characteristics of today's lizards, making them difficult to identify. Number 5. Australian trumpet. Commonly known as the giant whelk or the Australian trumpet, Syrinx aruos is a predatory marine snail found in the waters off northern Australia, eastern Indonesia, Papua New Guinea and other surrounding areas. Measuring up to 1 metre long and weighing as much as 18 kilograms, it's the world's largest snail species. Australian trumpets are found between the intertidal zone at depths of up to 50 metres, according to the Queensland Museum's website. They're often collected as pets or ornaments and are overfished, which is one reason they're reportedly verging on extinction. Large specimens are rarely seen, and scientists know little about the creature's behaviour or habits. A massive Australian trumpet recently made headlines when it was spotted unusually out of place on the shore of the Godavari River in Andhra Pradesh, India. Instead of leaving the highly endangered creature alone, locals decided to auction it off, and it sold for 18,000 rupees, roughly $240. Number 4. Wandering meatloaf. A mollusk that goes by the scientific name Cryptochiton stellari and is less formally known as the gumboot chiton or the giant western fiery chiton resembles what some have called a wandering meatloaf. Yep, I said what I said. This giant blob of meat, as Mike Wenner describes it in a Yahoo Entertainment article, contains a hard mineral that was previously only ever found in rocks. Using electron microscopes and other scientific instruments, a team of scientists examined the structure of the creature's teeth. They determined that it has unusually tough teeth since the gumboot chiton routinely scrapes them against hard rocks while it feeds on algae. Despite this practice, its teeth are left undamaged. But experts were surprised to find the mineral santobarbarite in the teeth, since it has never been found in a living creature, only in tiny amounts inside rocks. The chiton's teeth are attached to the soft tissue in its head by a hollow, tube-like bony structure called a stylus. This sparked researchers' interest for multiple reasons, including challenges in modern-day manufacturing that involve connecting ultra-hard materials to soft underlying structures. They believe that their answers may lie within nature, particularly species like the gumboot chiton, which evolved over hundreds of millions of years. Number 3. Triple hybrid warbler. In 2018, a birdwatcher in Roaring Spring, Pennsylvania observed a warbler with a combination of features that just didn't seem to go together. Video footage showed a male that sang like a chestnut-sided warbler, yet had the physical characteristics of blue-winged and gold-winged warblers. A study by experts at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology revealed that the bird was an extremely rare type of hybrid. Speaking with the Cornell Chronicler, lead study author David Howes explained that the female parent was a blue-winged and golden-winged warbler hybrid, while the male parent was a chestnut-sided warbler from a completely different genus. Researchers determined the triple hybrid warbler's parentage through a detailed and complex DNA analysis that replicated how it most likely inherited its genetics. This is the first recorded instance of a chestnut-sided warbler and either of the other two species successfully mating, which proves that they are genetically compatible despite long-standing evolutionary differences. Because it happened among a significantly declining golden-winged warbler population, Toes believed it may have been an instance of the female bird making the best of a bad situation. Experts are unsure of the potential implications of the triple hybrid's unique combination of features, but they believe that its mixed ancestry may give it the reputation of an outsider and make mating difficult. Meanwhile, hybridization between golden-winged and blue-winged warblers is so common, scientists are afraid that they will eventually cease to be two distinct species. Number 2. Pinocchio frog. The Latoria pinocchio, also known as the northern Pinocchio tree frog, was discovered back in 2008 at the Fohar Mountains of Indonesia's Papua province, but it was not officially described as a new species until recently in 2019. After herpetologist Paul Oliver spotted it by accident, the creature was informally called the Pinocchio frog for years to come. Unlike Pinocchio, the frog's unusual protruding downward-pointing nose, also called a rostrum, doesn't expand or shrink based on whether it's lying or being truthful. Instead, it inflates when the frog calls and deflates when the frog is calm and quiet. This bizarre nose is also seen in several related species found throughout Papua New Guinea, including Latoria cristali, Latoria havina, and more. Oliver and the other scientists are trying to figure out what exactly the frogs of the Latoria genus use their strange noses for. Mating is one possibility, although experts found no correlation between the size of the frog's nose and their choice in mating partners. Another theory suggests that the distinctive schnozzes help Pinocchio frogs identify one another by species, since Papua New Guinea contains more frog species than any other island in the world, with 450 identified and many more waiting to be discovered. Number 1. Psychedelic frogfish. Discovered in the waters off Ambon Island and Bali, Indonesia in 2009, the psychedelic frogfish is named after its trippy pink and white striped pattern. The species, which is a type of anglerfish, grows to just 15 centimeters long, but its swirling unique pattern makes a big statement, except in cases where it uses it to camouflage itself from predators. Unlike other frogfishes, its yellowish-brown colour never changes, and it's unique among other anglerfish species because the lure on its head is rather small. This flat-faced fish is capable of jutting its jaw forward and expanding its head, which it seems to do the most at times when it's not feeding. So far, scientists have found the psychedelic frogfish at depths between 5 and 7 meters, roughly 20 meters from the shoreline. In addition to its bizarre patterning, the species also walks on its pectoral fins along the seafloor. It also pushes off from the bottom using these fins along with a jet propulsion mechanism that makes it resemble a bouncing beach ball. The psychedelic frogfish is not equipped with any major defense mechanism against predators, but avoids becoming prey by hiding in small spaces and camouflaging itself using its otherwise conspicuous pattern. Scientists know relatively little information about this funky-looking creature, which was photographed in the wild for the first time back in 2008.
11. Tallulah the turtle. In early 2016, a young barnacle-encrusted loggerhead turtle washed ashore on Gwythian Beach in Cornwall, England. She was weak and dehydrated, and at first, rescuers were not sure if she would survive. Staff members of the Blue Reef Aquarium in Newquay removed the goose barnacles from the turtle, who they named Tallulah, and slowly but surely, she regained her health. Employee Steve Matchett, who likened the condition Tallulah was found in to that of a dead animal in a BBC interview, described her recovery as little short of a miracle. The Irish Navy transported Tallulah and another recently healed turtle 2,000 miles to the waters of Gibraltar and set the pair free. Rescuers always hoped that the lost turtles they returned to sea managed to stay in their habitats, but it appears as though more and more are being found elsewhere in recent years. The month before Tallulah became stranded, 16 warm-water turtles appeared on England's beaches. Experts blame devastating winter storms, which blow the creatures off their path and into places they wouldn't normally go. For loggerheads and other species who are not built for cold water, the effects are devastating. The lower temperatures cause their bodies to shut down, leaving rescuers with a very narrow window of opportunity for saving a stranded turtle's life. The rehabilitation often requires months of around-the-clock care, and sadly, they don't always survive. 10. Field-sized fungus. In thinking about the largest living organisms on Earth, we often skip right to animals and overlook plants and fungi, yet the #1 spot for this title goes to a honey mushroom, Armillaria solidipes, formerly Armillaria ostei, specimen in Malheur National Forest, Oregon. Its discovery began with the US Forest Service investigation of the surrounding area in 1998 amid unexplained die-off of large numbers of trees. Tests revealed that nearly all the trees were infected with honey fungus and that many of them were taken down by a single colony of specimens derived from a single organism. Scientists determined that the fungus is anywhere from 1,900 to 8,650 years old and that it covers a 3.7 square mile or 10 kilometers squared area, making it even bigger than the previous record holder for the world's largest living organism, a honey mushroom specimen in Michigan that occupies 37 acres or 15 hectares. These massive mushrooms are connected via an underground network of tissues called mycelia. Lifeforms like these have long called into question what constitutes a singular organism. Scientists believe A. solidipes fits the criteria because its cells are genetically identical clones who correspond with one another and share a common purpose. 9. Free dental work. Most people and animals alike know better than to go anywhere near a crocodile's mouth, out of a fear of losing a body part or being crushed or killed. But the Egyptian plover, nicknamed the crocodile bird, flies straight into the Nile crocodile's open mouth and comes out not only alive, but entirely unscathed. I can see you asking, how? In what's known as a symbiotic relationship, where two different biological organisms benefit from one another, the small bird feeds on decomposing pieces of meat between the crocodile's teeth, keeping the reptile's mouth clean and infection-free. It's surprising to see an animal that is so prone to aggression welcome a much smaller and more vulnerable creature anywhere near it with open arms, but the Nile crocodile apparently appreciates the value of some free dental work. In fact, when one finds themselves in need of some routine cleaning, they'll simply wait with their mouths open for plover birds to drop by and grab a bite to eat. 8. Submerged forest. In the Tian Shan Mountains in Kazakhstan, there's a lake filled with dead spruce trees that jut out of the water, making for a scenic but eerie sight. Known as Kindy Lake, the 1,300-foot-long or 400-meter body of water was formed following an earthquake in 1911, which triggered a landslide that created a natural dam and filled with rainwater. The site is famous for its beauty, with the trees standing in contrast to the turquoise backdrop of the lake's water. Even more stunning is when the lake is frozen over or when a misty fog lurks over the water, according to a Discovery.com article by Mike Epiphany. The view is equally stunning underwater because the trees have not decomposed, with even the needles remaining attached, resulting in what looks like a submerged forest. It's the lake's frigid temperatures, which rarely exceed 43 degrees Fahrenheit or 6 Celsius even during the summer, that has kept the trees so well preserved for so long. For all its allure and splendor, Kindy Lake sees relatively few visitors. It's more remote than some of the country's other, more easily accessible tourist attractions. An off-roading vehicle is required to reach the site, but those who have been there will say it was worth the effort. 7. Male pregnancies. In the animal kingdom, females typically birth and raise their young and are the primary caregivers, even if the male is involved in the offspring's upbringing. But these roles are reversed among 3 known marine creatures, including seahorses, pipefish, and sea dragons. How, you may ask? Male seahorses have a brood pouch on the front of their bodies. Females deposit their eggs into the pocket, where the male fertilizes and carries them until they are born. The eggs hatch 2 to 4 weeks after being fertilized, when the male starts to experience contractions. Anywhere between 50 and 2,000 fry, or baby seahorses, come out of his body. Equipped with a similar brood pouch, male pipefish give birth to anywhere between 5 and 40 offspring. Interestingly, these dads tend to not take care of their young if they don't like their mother, and they take the best care of the offspring they have with larger and more attractive females. Sea dragons are related to both seahorses and pipefish, but they do not have a brood pouch. Instead, females deposit a few hundred eggs into tiny cups on the male's tail, where they spend the next 4 to 6 weeks fertilizing. It takes several days for the eggs to hatch. 6. Psychedelic swamp. While the Florida swamps are certainly known for having some weird and downright scary wildlife, they didn't have a reputation for being very pleasing to the eye until 2016, when social media user Michael Hussey posted a photo of a rainbow-colored psychedelic swamp to the Florida Landscapes Facebook page. Taken in Tallahassee, the image shows water of various shades, including blue, pink, purple, yellow, and green. The colors appear every year around February or March, when leaves and other plant life start to decompose, releasing natural oils and tannic acids that create the Technicolor effect. Under the right sunlight, these swamps glimmer in an array of eye-catching hues, somewhat resembling the look of spilled oil. Patches of water that look very inky with dark red undertones, known as black water, are also an effect of the decomposition process. Have you ever seen a psychedelic swamp firsthand? Let me know in the comments below, but first, be sure to subscribe. 5. Mustached bird. Not many members of the animal kingdom sport mustaches, but some do, and a bird called the incoterm is arguably the most magnificent among them. Both male and female specimens are equipped with a white handlebar mustache that stands out against the bird's dark grey plumage. The length of the mustache is a major determining factor when it comes to choosing a mate, because birds with longer mustaches are considered healthier. As a result, they tend to have more active dating lives. When two incoterns with long mustaches mate, they have more and larger offspring than those who are less well-equipped. Found along South America's west coast from northern Peru to central Chile, the species gets its name from the powerful empire that once ruled the region. While the inkotern was once abundant, with a population numbering in the millions, its numbers have declined to an estimated 150,000 left out in the wild due to overfishing resulting in a decreased supply of anchovies and other food sources. Breeding is also difficult for these unique birds due to invasive predators like rats, natural disasters, and the guano or bat poop harvesting industry. All things considered, it's clearly a good thing that the most eligible incoterns instinctively know how to seek each other out, thereby optimizing the species' chances of survival. 4. Catatumbo lightning. The people who live where the Catatumbo River meets Lake Maracaibo in Venezuela witness the world's highest concentration of lightning, which occurs 300 days out of the year on average. Known as Catatumbo lightning, it strikes 250 times per square kilometre or 0.4 miles per year in the region where 1/4 of the country's population lives, according to NASA's Earth Data website. Scientists believe that winds blowing across Lake Maracaibo and nearby swampy plains, which are surrounded by mountains on 3 sides, create the perfect conditions for the seemingly constant lightning, which actually varies in frequency. In fact, it even stopped for several months between January and March 2010 during a drought, leading some people to believe it was over for good. Not surprisingly, lightning strikes 3 to 4 times as many people in Catatumbo as it does in the US, and a lot of people die from it. NOAA physicist and researcher Angel G. Munoz said in an interview with writer Agnieszka Gautier, a 2016 study determined that the Catatumbo lightning is more predictable than experts originally believed, and that it can be forecasted months in advance. Discoveries like these could prove to make the region much safer for its residents, who must live to learn at the mercy of the beautiful but deadly phenomenon. 3. Choking slime. Some animals have shockingly unique ways of defending themselves against predators. One of them is the deep-dwelling eel-like hagfish, which is the only known creature that has a skull but lacks a vertebral column. Hagfish are jawless and have remained largely unchanged for the last 300 million years or so, earning them a reputation as living fossils. Equally strange to the hagfish itself is its defense mechanism, which involves releasing strings of fibrous material that explode into slime and choke the attacker. A 2019 study describing the behavior explains that hagfish have slime glands that they release the threads from in a coiled state. In just a fraction of a second, the threads of mucus unravel and become entangled as they expand to 10,000 times their original size and blanket the predator. Worst case scenario, the predator asphyxiates and dies. Best case scenario, the cloud of mucus distracts the predator, enabling the hagfish to swim away. Because hagfish slime is made of thin fibers, it's stickier and more durable than the slime of other creatures and is incredibly effective. 2. Bowling Ball Beach. Located at the northern end of Schooner Gulch State Beach in Mendocino, California, Bowling Ball Beach contains a collection of large, round rocks along the shore measuring between 6.5 and 9.8 feet, 2 to 3 meters in diameter, which were exposed during low tide. At first glance, the spherical formations are mysterious. How did the rocks get there, and why are they so perfectly round? Their presence has given rise to numerous outlandish theories relating to dinosaurs, aliens, and other things, suggesting that something, or someone, other than nature created the formations. But these balls are actually concretions of materials that are harder than the surrounding mudstone that they sit in. As the Pacific Ocean eroded the landscape over millions of years, the receding mudstone disappeared and the remaining particles gathered together, forming the so-called bowling balls. This seemingly otherworldly phenomenon is known to occur elsewhere, including New Zealand, where there are two collections of concretions known as the Moiraki boulders, which measure between 1.6 and 7.2 feet, or 0.5 to 2.2 meters in diameter, and the Kutu boulders, which have a diameter of up to 10 feet, or 3 meters. Stone spheres can also be found in North Dakota's Cannonball River, Kazakhstan's Valley of the Balls, and in other places. 1. Striped icebergs. You may be surprised to learn that not all icebergs are the pristine, snow-white masses we usually see in pictures. But icebergs sometimes bear a surprising array of hues in the form of coloured stripes that are usually blue, green, yellow, and/or brown, with blue being the most common. Typically found in Antarctica, striped or banded icebergs form under special conditions. For example, blue stripes appear when crevices are filled with water and it freezes too quickly to form any bubbles, according to ZME Science. It's probably a good time to mention that the average iceberg appears white because it's formed from compressed snow, which reflects light from all directions. Green stripes result from algae-rich water infiltrating an iceberg's crevices, while yellow, brown and black stripes are usually caused by different sediments that the iceberg picked up while sliding downhill at an earlier point in time. Sedimentary bands also form when an iceberg's layers melt and refreeze. It takes hundreds or thousands of years for a banded iceberg to form, according to the Daily Mail. While striped glaciers are not exactly rare, they're also not very common, and people seldom get the opportunity to see one firsthand. Certain coloured stripes are easier to catch a glimpse of than others, as hobby blogger Dusty Pierce points out on his website. Green stripes, for example, are usually hidden on the underbelly of an ice mass, and they tend to only become visible when the iceberg flips over and before it melts.
Number 10. Miss Baker, the Space Monkey. Miss Baker is the original space monkey, or maybe I should say, was the original space monkey. In May of 1959, Miss Baker and Miss Able became the first United States animals to complete a flight beyond our atmosphere and into the beyond, into the great unknown. Miss Baker was a Peruvian squirrel monkey. She was selected from a small group of 25 other monkeys who had all been trained at the Naval School of Aviation Medicine. If this sounds completely ridiculous, that's because it is. There was a literal training program in the 50s to teach monkeys how to go up into space. While Miss Baker is the most famous, she had another monkey friend with her too, Miss Able, who was also stuffed into a little monkey flight capsule, dressed in a specially designed spacesuit, wired up with electrodes, and then flung into space. The suborbital flight only lasted 15 minutes. The monkeys travelled 300 miles, or almost 500 kilometres above the surface, and then came back down to Earth. Amazingly, both Miss Baker and Miss Able weren't dead. After this, they were flown to Washington for a press conference and treated like celebrities. Miss Baker was transferred to the US Space and Rocket Center in 1971, where she went on public display. She died of natural causes in 1984. Number 9. Muscled mice. Genetically modified mice were recently sent to the International Space Station. When I say genetically modified, I'm talking about real super mice, modified by science to be extra strong. Are you picturing a little mouse flexing right now? Anyways, 40 female mice from a lab in Maine were manipulated using genetics to have their muscles grow significantly larger than ordinary mice, about twice as much. It was an experiment known as Rodent Research 19, and it was designed to study how bone density and skeletal muscle mass can be damaged by prolonged time spent in space. Specifically, scientists were interested in using special treatments to block molecular signaling pathways to prevent muscle and bone density from being lost without gravity. This sounds like a lot of crazy science, and it honestly is. Scientists use a special agent to block the pathways of the genetically modified mice. There was also a control of mice that didn't receive the agent. Those that received it maintained and in some cases increased muscle mass even without any gravity. They also recovered quicker once returning to Earth. The consensus here is that by blocking certain hormones in the brain, scientists can actually prevent muscle loss in the animals when stuck in space with no gravity. Fascinating. Number 8. Laika, the space dog. Laika was a Soviet space dog who became one of the first animals to enter space. She was the first animal that ever orbited our planet, which was a pretty successful accomplishment for a stray dog who started life on the streets of Moscow. Depending on how you feel about animal rights and stuff, you may consider this quite the come-up story. She went on the spacecraft Sputnik 2, which was launched into low orbit on November of 1957. But the story of Laika is actually a very sad one. According to the Smithsonian Magazine, there was no plan for her recovery or survival. The brutal Russians sent her into space with no intention of bringing her back to the surface alive. Because of this, the poor dog died either from overheating or because of asphyxiation shortly after entering outer space. This may seem extremely cruel, and it most definitely is, but at the same time, at that time, there wasn't actually the technology yet to bring an animal back from space. Scientists also believed that humans would never be able to survive being launched off-world. The only way to test it, the Soviets saw, was to let a dog try. The experiment proved that a living passenger would indeed survive the micro-G environment, and it helped pave the way for the first humans to be launched into space. So while Laika tragically died in outer space, she also paved the way for the future of space travel. Number 7. The first cat in space. 6 years after the Russians launched Laika the dog into space, sending the poor pup to her death, the first cat was then launched into space. The big difference here is that the cat survived. The feline was named Felicette, and to this day she is the only cat that has ever survived a solo journey into space. Space Cat! It was part of a suborbital mission in 1963, and it only lasted about 15 minutes. She was recruited by France as part of a rigorous training program involving 14 cats. She was chosen as the most promising candidate and launched from a French base in the Sahara Desert. She travelled to an altitude of 100 miles, or about 160 km above the surface of Earth, and after 15 minutes, the capsule containing the cat detached from its rocket and fell back to the ground. The parachute safely deployed, and the cat was rescued, still alive. But things get pretty gruesome for our feline friend. Just a handful of months after her safe return, scientists euthanized her, cut her out her brain, and studied it in the name of science. In 2017, a Kickstarter campaign was launched for the brave space cat to get her a memorial. Just recently, after receiving $57,000 in donation, Felicette finally got the memorial she deserves. How do you feel about animals being launched into space? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. NASA's Space Fish. NASA recently sent 32 fish into space. The fish went up with 3 astronauts, including Commander Kevin Ford. They journeyed to the International Space Station. But just why in the world would NASA send fish to space? According to Business Insider, it was part of an experiment to see how microgravity would impact marine life. Specifically, scientists were interested in seeing what kind of skeletal changes would happen to fish in an environment without gravity. Basically, they just did this because they could. The fish chosen for the mission were Medaka fish, a type of freshwater fish found in Southeast Asia. Because they have transparent skin and it's easy to see their internal organs, they made the perfect experimental candidates. They were put into a specialised aquatic habitat. Shortly after, they died. The fish began dropping like flies, though of course they couldn't actually drop because there was no gravity to pull them down. The fish died one by one for unknown reasons, though a biologist might suggest that the stress of being taken from a river in Southeast Asia to the International Space Station may have had something to do with it. The dead fish were sent back to Earth as specimens to be studied, while researchers preserved the few fish that still lived in the freezer. Chances are, those are dead too. As for what scientists learned about fish bones in space, well, they haven't actually published any of their findings just yet. Number 5. Ham the chimp. In the 1950s, NASA was at work training chimpanzees to fly a spacecraft. After all, chimps are our closest biological relatives in the animal world, and it made sense to send a chimp into space before a person. This kind of thing would never fly today, but in the 1950s it really was the Wild West of science. The monkey chosen was one of 40 chimps acquired for the program. All the chimps were trained in G-force simulators at the Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. But the most important training was for the chimps to learn to pull a simple lever whenever a blue light flashed on. To do this, scientists would reward the chimp with a banana each time it pulled the lever at the appropriate time. When the chimp failed, it would get an electric shock to its feet. Horrible, I know. In the end, the training worked though. A chimp named Ham was chosen in 1961 to be the first hominid sent into space. He was allegedly chosen out of 6 promising participants because before the flight he was feisty and in a good mood. During the flight, Ham performed exceptionally well. The monkey was one of the first ever to experience over 6 minutes of weightlessness. When the blue light came on, he pulled the lever. This proved that humans could perform simple functions in space. The mission only lasted about 16 minutes and then Ham the chimp splashed down in the ocean. He survived and lived the rest of his life in a zoo in North Carolina, dying in 1983 at the ripe old chimp age of 25. Number 4. The bullfrogs. On November 9, 1970, NASA sent a pair of bullfrogs to space in the name of science. The bullfrogs were tucked inside a small satellite. The poor bullfrogs had no idea the one-way journey they were about to embark upon. The bullfrogs orbited the planet for 6 whole days, along with a heap of small instruments and sensors. Back on Earth, scientists were observing the effects of zero gravity on the confused and probably very upset bullfrogs. And believe it or not, it was all about the inner ear. Scientists wanted to know how the inner ear balance mechanism would function in a space environment. The mission was dubbed Orbiting Frog Otolith 1, the otolith being the piece of the inner ear that scientists were interested in. The frogs were secured inside of special living containers outfitted with heaters and artificial lungs to keep them alive. However, before they were sent into space, scientists disconnected their ability to move by cutting their nerve endings. The experiment was a success. Scientists found out that after a couple of days, the frogs' ears normalized. In other words, scientists learned that people's ears could more or less get used to being in the great vacuum of space. As for the frogs, well, they died. Number 3. Space spiders. Spiders have actually been sent into space more than once. One of the more recent experiments was by NASA to discover how arachnids operated in zero gravity. You may have noticed that when spiders sit in their webs, they always have their head pointed down. This is so that they can catch their prey faster, moving in the direction of gravity. To find out how they would adapt to living in space, NASA sent a few different spider species to the International Space Station back in 2008. One of the spiders escaped and vanished, which is totally understandable. One minute you're just sitting in your web, the next you're being sent into space? Heck no, I'd try to escape too. Then the other 2 spiders couldn't quite figure out how to spin their webs in that kind of environment, and they got tangled up. The last horrible thing that went wrong was that the flies sent to be the food for the spiders reproduced far faster than expected, and after about 2 weeks the researchers couldn't even see the spiders because they were literally buried under a mountain of space flies. It was a total disaster and one of the biggest experimental failures with insects ever on the ISS. In 2011, when the opportunity for a similar experiment on board the ISS came up again, Dr. Samuel Joschke of the University of Basel got involved to prepare and analyse their new attempt. This time, the experiment would go differently. It started with 4 spiders of the same species. 2 flew to the ISS in separate habitats and the other 2 stayed on Earth in separate habitats. The ones on Earth were kept and observed under identical conditions as their fellows travelling in space, except that they were exposed to terrestrial gravity instead. Number 2. Microscopic worms. Speaking of weird insect experiments, worms were launched into space in 2018 and there's a follow-up mission planned for 2021. The missions are part of an experiment to better understand why astronauts lose their muscle mass while living in space. As you may already know, after 6 months in space, an astronaut can lose up to a shocking 40% of their muscle mass. The worms were supposed to help them with that. The worms were quite small, only able to be seen under a microscope. Still, they do share some essential characteristics with humans. We both use muscles to move from one place to another. On board the International Space Station, the worms are to be put inside of a special device crafted as an obstacle course for the microscopic worms. A microscopic camera will then watch how the worms maneuver through the obstacle course and how their movements change over time. The experiment was already done once between 2018 and 2019, but the findings were never released. Now there's a new project happening in 2021 involving the same worms and trying to solve the same problem. We're hoping this time there will be more scientific revelations made thanks to the brave worms. Number 1. The sex space geckos. The Russians recently sent 5 geckos into space as part of a weird sex experiment and they all died. According to the BBC, the geckos probably froze to death after the heating system malfunctioned. But just what exactly was this weird Russian space sex gecko experiment? It was actually pretty legit. The scientists wanted to study the effects of weightlessness on the sex lives of geckos. For what reason? Beats me. Unfortunately, they didn't get any results because they all froze to death. However, the fruit flies that were sent into space with the geckos as food survived and reproduced. Nobody really wanted that to happen, but at least it's proof that flies, the most annoying things in the world, can still turn into huge pests in space. Thanks for watching. How did you feel about the animals in space? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe for more great stuff. See you next time. Bye.